Couple more losses for the Sabres. We've got a game to talk about on Tuesday night. And I got a question for fans. Who's the scapegoat? I'm trying to figure that out here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase on today's episode.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including our YouTube channel. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, Locked On Sabres there. Sneaky Joe DiBiase on the podcast today. Been off for a couple of days. I've been under the weather, and yet I'm still a little bit under the weather, so I might have to take a couple extra water breaks if you hear a 2-3 second pause at any point. I don't think I've got the tissues ready to go here. I think I'll probably be good. But yeah, we missed a couple losses. Not great. Not great. We're now at an 8-game losing streak for the Buffalo Sabres. We'll talk about tonight's game, Tuesday night's game, if you're listening to this on Tuesday. We're going to save that for the back half of today's show since we're getting today's episode a little bit late in the day. So if you are listening before Sabres Canadiens, we'll be previewing that in the back half of today's show. And if you were listening on Wednesday, you already know what the game happened. We'll have that show for you on Wednesday afternoon, and you can just listen to the first part, I guess. Which I have a question about the Sabres that I don't know if it has an answer to it, and I don't know what the answer will become to this question. So stay tuned. That's coming up in just a second here. But we'll have our betting preview for Sabres and Canadiens tonight, starting goaltenders, and also what the lineup is going to look like, an interesting, healthy scratch for Don Granato, and an interesting return for the Sabres in this game that I'm very excited about, and I think fans should be very excited about as well. That's all coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, at Locked On Sabres to follow us on Twitter, at Sneaky Joe Sports to follow me on Twitter. And we will start today with my question of the day, which I don't have an answer to, and I would love to hear fan opinion to it on my Twitter, at this podcast Twitter, or on our YouTube channel. I know we always get comments there, so I don't even have to ask for it. I know we will get YouTube comments on this question, and I look forward to reading them on the next show. Who is the scapegoat? This is now an 8-game losing streak. The Sabres are in 7th out of 8 in the Atlantic Division, and the season is already going by the wayside at 7-11 wins and losses. That's their record. But there's a lot of commonalities between this year and previous seasons. Greg Wyshynski tweeted out the other day the Sabres record in the first 15, 20 games in each of the last 4 or 5 years. And almost every year, there's one year in there where it didn't happen, but almost every year, the Sabres get out to a hot start, and then very quickly after that, they completely fall apart, and we get to December, and the season's over. They'll have a great October, horrible November, nothing in December beyond. And this year is going the same way. This year, the Sabres start 7-3, 8-game losing streak. Very similar to past seasons. The difference between this year and previous years is fans, I don't think, know who to be mad at right now for this. Before, Jack Eichel, deserved or undeserved. I think a lot of it was undeserved, but got a lot of criticism. And he became very polarizing because he was a central figure. He was supposed to be God and lift the Sabres up on his own. And he was the captain, which also I think mattered in this equation, is that he wore the C. And before Eichel, well, Reinhart, I think, got some of that blame as well. Ristolainen too. Like, that trio got a lot of fallout. Before that, it was Ryan O'Reilly. Ryan O'Reilly got a lot of the blame. You're not a fast enough skater. You're not a good enough leader. You're not a good enough locker room guy. Things that you'd have to point to off the ice. And also, Tim Murray would have years where we were riding him. And Jason Botterill, for 2 years at least, was the central figure that we were focused on as the scapegoat. And the coach would cycle into that as well. Ralph Kruger, 2 years ago when the Sabres go on their 12-game losing streak, fire Kruger, and then it becomes 18. But Kruger was the guy that we couldn't wait for him to be fired. So it was the coach. And Before that, it would have been Housley. So we've kind of rotated in and out players, star players, leaders, coaches, GMs. It's been a cycle here with the Sabres. Now the season's going by the wayside, and who's the finger pointing towards? Who's the blame being put on? Because I don't really see it happening. I see criticism of the team overall in terms of their build, and I see some fans that think they're too small, which is ridiculous. Because I think I saw today. I want to fact check this before you take me at my word, but I thought I saw today that they are the biggest team in hockey, or they are one of the biggest teams in hockey. But pushed around, there's always that fan out there that thinks they're pushed around even when they're not. There's criticism of their being too young and that this was inevitable for a team that is the youngest in hockey. And there's some merit to that, I think. There is criticism of the goaltending. And I think that might be fair. That might be the fairest name finger pointing to have into the stage in the game. But now that Eric Comrie is out with an injury, you can't be mad at him. He's not playing for a little bit. So, and Anderson's actually been relatively okay. So who are we pointing at? And I'm going to go down the list here. The names that we could get to pointing the finger at, and the names that maybe down the road fans are going to start to criticize and be mad at because this team can't get good. I think number one on that list has to be Kevyn Adams. Kevyn Adams, and I think I'll give you the scoop here that I have Don Granato number 2 on this list of who becomes the scapegoat. Granato I have number 2 and not number 1 because Kevyn Adams predates Don Granato. And even though that timeline of Sabres, history was probably led by Ralph Kruger, I don't really believe that Kevyn Adams had full autonomy to do whatever he wanted. There were a lot of moves that were Kruger moves when Kruger was the head coach. He had a sports management background. He was, I think, the leader of the organization at that point in time. But despite that, Adams was here, and Adams was pulling the trigger. If he wasn't, the head of the organization, he was number 2, and maybe he was number 1. Maybe I'm not giving him enough credit, but now, the roster is his. The roster decisions, the trading, the direction of the franchise and the organization is up to Kevyn Adams. So I think he's got to be number 1. The problem for me with Adams being a scapegoat at any point is I don't really think there's anything to be done about it. Tim Murray, fans eventually got at him, and it was, he'll get fired. He could possibly get fired. Of course he could. Jason Botterill, same thing. As you were screaming about him being fired because you could see it happening. I almost think Adams, I don't know if he could be fired. I don't know if they would fire him, I should say. Of course he could be fired. But he's been so close to the Pagulas, and he was a strict Pagulas hire. The Pagulas, when they hired Adams, they talked about how they felt let down by hockey people in their previous hires. And that, sounds to me like they're going with their own guy. And they're almost saying, hey, the previous guys weren't really our guys. They were just advised to us as guys that should be our guys. Adams is their guy. He's their idea. Nobody else in the National Hockey League would have hired Kevyn Adams as their general manager with his resume. Nobody. VP of Business Administration, nobody takes that jump from VP of Business Administration to general manager. Adams did. Why? He's a Pagula guy. And criticize that if you want, but to me that means he ain't going anywhere anytime soon. And they're going to stick with this and give him as much time as humanly possible. I don't even know what the scenario would be, a year from now, 2 years from now. It would have to go so poorly that he were to be fired. I just do not see it happening. So I think he's the most natural name that fans will talk about as a scapegoat for this thing not working right now. But I don't think there'll be any action to it. So I got him number 1 in this list. Granato, I have number 2. And I wonder about Granato because I think Granato is more popular at the moment. I think fans still like Granato, the way he sounds, the way he talks, the way that his philosophy is about the sport, wanting to play fast and offensive and focus on development and youth. I think there's still a lot of likable traits about Don Granato. But eventually the wins and losses have to come. We talked about this before the year that the honeymoon phase eventually will end and expectations will arrive. And that will come even quicker if you start playing as poorly as they are right now. Hey, where's the winning? Because development's nice and all this talk is nice, but where's the wins and where's the wins? And that's not happening at the moment. Granato into his second full year, plus, a little bit of stretch of games 2 years ago. He's getting close to that territory where we got with Phil Housley and Ralph Kruger, where, a couple of years and it's not working and the coach is usually the one to go. So Granato might be more likely to someday be moved on from if this doesn't work. But I don't know that fans want to scapegoat him. I think he's likable at this point in time, and I don't see enough yet that he's the guy that they'll want to jump to. But again, I don't think there's a good answer to this. Two other names I wrote down. One is Tage Thompson. He's not happening right now for this. Nobody's pointing the finger at Tage Thompson because he's been incredible. He's been their best player through the last, couple of weeks. And on the season as a whole, you might want to have a debate whether him or Dahlin have been their best player. So Thompson, nobody's going to blame him right now because he's thriving. He's playing incredible. He's in the Rocket Richard odds right now. Like he's dynamite. So, and he doesn't wear a letter. And that plays into this too, I think, a little bit, in that he's not seen as like a leader in the locker room. He's there to score goals. So no one's pointing the finger at Thompson. No one's pointing the finger at Dahlin. Now, Dahlin does wear a letter, and he might be the face of the franchise at this point in time. He's also their best player. And this is kind of a stupid thing that we do in sports where if the team's not doing well, we'll all yell at the best player on the team, even though he's might be the only one playing well. We're not there with Dahlin. And we're maybe never going to get there with Dahlin. He seems to be he's in the type of role that is usually the culprit to be scapegoated. That's what's happened here, right? Like, look who their best player has been. Ryan O'Reilly was their best player when he was traded. He was scapegoated leading up to that. Jack Eichel was the team's best player when they traded him. Leading up to that, he was scapegoated. And for right or wrong, like these guys, like they were. Reinhart was their second best player at the time. He was scapegoated leading into that. So I get it's a hard question to answer because the guys, and there's no one that makes big money, right? Like Thompson makes big money, but he's playing great. Kyle Okposo, he's in the final year of his deal. I know he's the captain, but he's likable now too. People love him. I don't think anyone's pointing the finger at Okposo for this not working. Skinner, it kind of works, but he's kind of producing as well. So that's not happening. Alex Tuch, no. Like, who do you point the finger at? I think it has to go. I think the next up in line for that is Adams or Granato, but it's tough. It's tough to see that happening. So it makes them hard to talk about, by the way. I'm not complaining about my job at all or anything, but it does because you either talk about how good a team is when they're thriving, or if things aren't working, it's a complaint department and you want to talk about, where do you want to move on? Where do you want to get better? Where do you want to make changes? And that question is hard to answer right now because the Sabres are so young and they're so early in this process. So we'll continue to evaluate this as the season goes on, and I'll be looking out for it, see who fans are criticizing. I don't need them to be criticizing people. It just, it usually will happen, and it's not right now. So interesting conversation. Look forward to some feedback from fans on this and listeners on this. We'll take a timeout. When we come back, we'll preview Sabres and Canadiens. We've got a 7 o'clock puck drop at 7 o'clock. We've got a player returning to the Sabres lineup, and we've got an interesting player coming out of the Sabres lineup. And then we've got a betting preview of tonight's game at Bet Online. That is all ahead here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, and we are brought to you by SimpliSafe. If you've thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Sabres listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you don't want to miss it. I love it. SimpliSafe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report, a third year in a row. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agency will use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. 24/7 monitoring system, less than $1 per day, less than half the price of ADT's traditional professional installed system. Don't miss the chance to save big on the only security system that I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. It's their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Jody Biasi back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. When you're done here, be sure to make your second listen. Locked On Today Sports. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Jody Biasi back here on the show. Sabres and Canadiens. We got a 7 o'clock puck drop in Montreal. Saw some videos that Jason Pominville will be in attendance, and he did some, media. So you might be hearing from Pominville in and around the last little bit here. Lines for the Sabres in this game. So we have one interesting return to the lineup, and we have another interesting exit from the lineup. And we'll start with the return. Mattias Samuelsson is back. Mattias Samuelsson, a sorely needed return to the ice for Mattias Samuelsson. I mean, the Sabres have been scoring. Even in this losing streak, they've been scoring goals. Their problem has been they can't prevent chances in their own end. And now steps in their best defensive defenseman into the lineup. Samuelsson has developed into their best defensive defenseman, right there with Dahlin. Dahlin, of course, is the all-around guy, but Dahlin's phenomenal zone end. Samuelsson is he is polished, he is smooth, he is physical, he's big, he's got the whole package. He's great with the outlet passes, not feeling pressure and turning the puck over. He's phenomenal. Huge return for the Sabres. And hopefully he can kickstart a couple of wins here for the Sabres and log some big minutes, which they need. So their blue line for this game, Samuelsson will skate with Rasmus Dahlin right back on the top pair. Owen Power back with Henri Jokiharju on the second pair, and then Jacob Bryson with Ilya Lyubushkin on the third pair. The Sabres are back to full health after weeks and weeks of injuries on the blue line. They are finally back to full health. Jokiharju returning last week, Samuelsson returning this week, and Lyubushkin returning last week as well. The interesting exit from the lineup. Peyton Krebs, who has not scored in over 30 games dating back to last year, he's out. He will not play. He is a healthy scratch in this game. Zemgus Girgensons goes into the lineup, and the recently claimed Tyson Jost goes into the lineup for the Buffalo Sabres. You might be asking, who? Who's Tyson Jost? Tyson Jost, waiver claim from the Sabres over the weekend. He was a first-round pick, in fact, a high first-round pick, 10th overall in the 2016 NHL draft by the Colorado Avalanche. His development has stalled. He is now 24 years old, and he's not really a very great player. He, last year, with the Colorado Avalanche and the Minnesota Wild, between the two teams, had 8 goals and 12 assists, 20 points in 80 games played. His career highs, 12 goals in his first full NHL season way back in 2017-18, and his career high in points, 26 in 2018-19, the following season. So a lot of Casey Middlestat comparisons for Tyson Jost, just a bottom 6, guy that kind of gets run over at 5-on-5, once a highly thought of prospect that's kind of gone sideways. I think Middlestat's a better player than Jost is at this stage. Jost also a little bit more two-way game. Don Granato and Kevyn Adams both talked about his ability to penalty kill as a reason why they put this claim in on him. And he will skate, he'll play a checking role. He'll play a defensive role, penalty kill. And I think what he does is allow the Sabres to remove Riley Sheahan from the lineup, because that needed to happen. Riley Sheahan needed to get out of this lineup, and Jost allows them to get him out of there. So Jost will play tonight with Zemgus Girgensons at center and Rasmus Asplund. So that's a checking line. Jost in for Okposo, who is still out, and Sheahan comes out as well. Other forward lines, Thompson, Tuck, Skinner stays together. Cousins, Paterka, and Quinn. And then Middlestat, Hinostroza, and Olofsson. Craig Anderson will start between the pipes for the Sabres. It will be Jake Allen, a starting goalie against Sabres finally. Montreal will go with Jake Allen in net. We will preview this game when we return here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. And when we do preview tonight's game from a betting perspective, we will do that with Bet Online. BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis this season. They've got some updated NHL awards odds. They've got Rasmus Dahlin as the 5th leading candidate to win the Norris Trophy at plus 1,400. They've got Tage Thompson listed in the Rocket Richard odds. Also, interestingly, they've got former Sabre Linus Ullmark as the favorite to win the Vezina Trophy at plus 400. You can find all of those at Bet Online. It's a perfect spot for the World Cup if you're looking for some odds and action on the FIFA World Cup. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at Bet Online as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, and let's head to betonline.net for our odds on tonight's game for the Sabres and the Montreal Canadiens. And the Sabres on the road, 8-game losing streak. You might think, they're an underdog, a big underdog. Well, Montreal is not that much better. And in fact, the Sabres have outplayed Montreal in a lot of categories in the last week or so. So even though Montreal's got a better record, I think the Sabres are a better team. And that's why tonight I would bet the Sabres, despite the fact they're not really an underdog. In fact, they are not. On the money line, you can get the Sabres at plus 100, even money, $100 to win 100 for the Buffalo Sabres to win this game outright. Now, that means the puck line is heavily weighted. Sabres at plus a goal and a half or minus 250. No thank you on that front. And then the over-under for tonight's game is 6.5, minus 111 for the over 6.5 in this game. I do like the over in this game. Montreal has allowed 4 or more goals in 4 consecutive games. The Sabres are the perfect over team right now because they play offensive, they try to generate chances, and they also allow chances in their own end. So that's what I'm going for on tonight's game. And then if I'm looking at prop bets for tonight's game, I'm going to go with Alex Tuch at minus 150 to record 1 single point. He gets power play minutes. He's on the top line with Thompson and Skinner, who are both goal scorers. He can, of course, score on his own. He's got 5 points in his last 3 games, Alex Tuch does. So he's playing hot right now. And minus 150, I usually don't like taking minus bets, but I will do it at this point in time because of the decent odds that you get. So I'm going Tuch minus 150 to record a single point in this game. And that is going to do it for us today on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Enjoy the game between the Sabres and the Canadiens, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for making us your first listen. Now go make your next listen. Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you tomorrow on Locked On Sabres.